Calling it rock, paper, scissors. Do y'all know how to play? You're going to need a partner, so look up at your neighbor and say, neighbor, be my partner, be my partner. If you don't know how to play, I don't know where you went to elementary school, okay? But in the game, paper covers rock, scissors cut paper, but rocks crush scissors. It's a 3-count where you say rock, paper, scissors, and then on the count of 3 you have to choose to either be scissors, paper, or rock. Y'all ready? So look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, you ready? Okay, come on, let's count it out. Rock, paper, scissors. Did you win or lose? If you won, tell your neighbor, say, that's gonna cost you dinner today. But don't you wish that every decision you had to make in life was as easy as rock, paper, scissors? Imagine making your big decisions, rock, paper, scissors, and if you didn't like the outcome, you could go for the best 2 out of 3. But unfortunately, in life, not every decision works like that. Give me an amen right there. And so, over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about how to make decisions, and today, with the aid and assistance and anointing of the Holy Spirit, we want to teach and preach about how to make tough decisions, because tough decisions are part of life. Choosing a college major, selecting a career, making a career change, figuring out where to live, figuring out who to date, figuring out whether or not to get married or to have children, or knowing when it's time to quit and walk away from something. Tough decisions are a part of life. When you're standing next to the bedside of somebody you love and only the machines are keeping them alive. When you're unexpectedly pregnant and you barely know the other person. When you hate your job but they pay you well. When you love to sing but don't like the people in the choir. When you love the usher but can't stand the other people on the usher board. Tough decisions are a part of life. Have you ever really had to make a tough decision? Because if you have, and I have a funny feeling and a sneaky suspicion that most of us have, then you can identify with a remarkable young man in our text. Daniel was forced to make a series of tough decisions which he could not avoid and could not evade at a very early age in his life. And I'm already in somebody's mailbox because tragically the young in our community often have to meet, manage, and meander through crises very early in their lives. The crisis of hypersensitive policing, all too frequent gun violence, mass school shootings, the lure of chemical dependency, encroaching student debt, high unemployment, and poverty. Like Daniel, many of our youth face some incredibly tough challenges early in their lives. If you don't mind, let's Snapchat Daniel for a minute. He was one of the best and brightest of Israel, and we know a fair amount about his profile. It's right there in chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. We know that he came from a family with high social status, and he was physically flawless. What a way to have the text describe you. He was a strikingly handsome man, a sort of combination of Denzel Washington, Morris Chestnut, Idris Elba, and Ralph Angel all put together. He was extremely intelligent. He was qualified to serve in the king's palace, which means that he had a high level of what we would call emotional intelligence or people smarts. He was devoted to God and to God's community, and he would have all the dreams that young men like that have. Back in Judah, his future would have been quite predictable. The whole world was literally out in front of him. He would go to a great school and then on to glittering success in whatever field he chose. He'd have a fairy tale wedding, maybe not at the scale of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, but a great one nevertheless. He'd live in an enviable home, raise a wonderful family, occupy a prominent place in society, and do great things in the name of God and for the people of God. But life did not turn out the way that Daniel planned. And somebody here can identify with that sentiment, because sometimes despite our best made plans, things don't work out in reality how we envision them in our minds. Tap your neighbor and say, I know that's right. There's a whole world of heartbreak in those two verses that began Daniel 1, where it said Nebuchadnezzar came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Here's the heartbreak, that generations before, God had made a promise to Abraham. I'll make your name great. I'll bless you, and you're going to be a blessing to all people. And that promise sustained the nation of Israel century after century. That's all they had. And the truth about life is that sometimes all you have is a promise from God. You don't have a hint, a clue, or a trace of evidence, just a promise that says, he that has begun this good work in you is able to complete it, and he will. Just a promise that says, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Just a promise that says, be not weary in well-doing, for you will reap in due season if you faint not. Just a promise that says, they that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength, mount up on wings like eagles, run and not be weary, walk and not faint. Sometimes all you have is a promise. God promised Abraham, confirmed it with Isaac, verified it with Jacob, that God would one day give them a land, a name, an inheritance of their own. But none of them anticipated the twists and turns they'd have to navigate en route to that destination. In fact, by the days of Daniel, the Babylonians had become the ruling superpower on the planet, and with very little effort, they destroyed all that remained of the Hebrew nation. The temple now was a memory. The sacred contents it possessed were now kept in the temples of foreign gods. Daniel would come to adulthood and spend the rest of his life in a foreign country. He would give his best service and his best effort to a foreign king. Life did not turn out the way that Daniel planned. He lost his culture. He lost the relationships he cherished. He would have to learn to speak a foreign language. He would live and die in a place he never wanted to be. He would never go home again. He even lost his name. And the name deal for Hebrews in particular was quite significant, because verse 7, Daniel and his three friends are each given new names. Now, each of their old names had a reference to God in it. Their names reminded them every time they spoke them that they belonged to God and that God was looking out for them. But Nebuchadnezzar, when he took them into exile, gave them a new name as a way of saying, you've got a new king now, and I will define your identity. Because the name Daniel meant the Lord will judge. And throughout his life, every time Daniel heard his name spoken, it was a reminder that no matter how it looks, the Lord will set things right. The Lord will see that justice was done. His very name was a promise every time he heard it, every day of his life. But now, he's not even Daniel anymore. He's Belshazzar. The Lord was not setting things right. In fact, it looked like his promise had perished, and he's facing some extremely tough decisions. Will he be who they want him to be? Will he sacrifice his identity, faith, custom, and tradition for their foreign substitutes? Will he fit in just so he can get in? What do you do when life drops you in Babylon? Some people wither in spirit, others just get through the tough times barely. And yet, interestingly enough, there are some who don't just survive traumatic events, they actually thrive. And I'm preaching to about 50 of them right now, so tap your neighbor and say, he's talking about me right there. Yeah, they actually enlarge their capacity to handle problems and strengthen their ability to persist, even to endure and be creative and grow in the midst of trauma. What will be your response? How do you handle it when life drops you in Babylon? Because Daniel not only survived in Babylon, he thrived in Babylon, and in so doing, he gives us at least 3 handles to hold on to when we are facing tough decisions in life. Anybody here interested? How do you make tough decisions? Well, number 1, I won't keep you waiting. You got to resolve in advance to honor your convictions. Let the whole church say resolve. See, Daniel refused to live as a passive victim of circumstances beyond his control. He refused to get tangled up in stuff that would cause him to betray his deepest beliefs and his most profound convictions. In short, Daniel resolved to honor God in advance. Verse 8 is the hinge of the entire book of Daniel in chapter 1. Everything turns here because, get this, up until this point in this story, the Babylonians were determining everything. The Babylonians were in the driver's seat. Nebuchadnezzar, their leader, determined to conquer Israel. Nebuchadnezzar, their leader, determined to cart off its most sacred objects and its best and brightest citizens to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar determined their new names and their new identity. Nebuchadnezzar determined to enroll Daniel and his peers in a Babylonian version of Harvard or Yale. He picked their major. He selected their classes. He chose the books that they would read. He even selected their college meal plan. They would eat food and drink wine straight off the king's table. The easiest thing in the world would have been for Daniel to think of himself as just a passive victim in all these circumstances, a victim of forces too big for him to handle. But notice he didn't do that. And so as verse 8 says, at this point in the story, if you follow it, the initiative, the power, the resolve, the energy in this entire story shifts. We see this in the way that that one Hebrew word is used in verse 8. It's translated into English as resolved or determined. The first 2 times it's used, it refers to the Babylonians. They are determining this and they are determining that. But in verse 8, it's Daniel, the captive, Daniel, the exile, Daniel, the prisoner, that makes the decision. And at this point, the verb is strengthened. It's as if it's underlined, as it says, Daniel resolved in his heart to honor God. I'm reminded right there of Popeye, who would endure the attacks and criticisms of Brutus, but eventually he would draw a line in the sand and say the same thing on every Popeye cartoon. That's all I can stand, and I can't stand no more. See, that's a depiction of Daniel's demeanor. He decided, he resolved that enough was enough. He would not detach himself from his culture, nor desecrate himself by participating in the meal plan that had been selected for him. And so he goes, if you follow the story, to the dean of the school and says that he didn't want to eat the Atkins diet, and nor did he want the college cake party diet with all the alcohol he could drink at every meal. And notice he made those decisions before the food was ever put on the table, before the cork was ever popped on the wine, before he was tempted by the sights, smells, and sounds of that feast, which should remind all of us that we've got to make our own resolutions and decide our own convictions in advance. Don't wait until you're in it to decide about it. You got to do it beforehand. Daniel refused this menu not because he was vegan. He ate meat like any other good Hebrew, but he refused this menu because it came from the king's table. And any food from the king's table would have first been offered to the little g gods of Babylon, and to eat it was to celebrate and honor that false false idol posing as a real deity. And Daniel didn't want his provision, his protection, or his promotion to be construed by anyone as being the result of his giving honor to a false deity, because he knew and understood that he survived and that he would thrive only because of the grace of Almighty God. It took incredible courage for Daniel to stand up and stand out like this, because remember, Nebuchadnezzar was not the kind of leader who cut a lot of people slack. Don't believe me? Just watch. In 2 Kings 25, a puppet king named Zedekiah rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar captured Zedekiah and his family and had his sons killed while Zedekiah watched, and then he put Zedekiah's eyes out so that the last thing he would ever remember seeing in this life was the sight of his sons being killed in front of him. That's the guy that Daniel is defying right here. But notice that that didn't bother Daniel, because he remembered his real name. Y'all missed that. And the message that it communicated. He believed in his heart that God was the only true judge, and therefore he decided to honor God no matter what. Decisive people that survive and thrive in the Babylons of life are always like this. No matter what goes on, they cling to their convictions. Whether it's popular or not, whether it's affirmed or not, whether it's verified and validated by others or not, they cling to their convictions. They don't use circumstances that are beyond their control as an excuse to quit, surrender, or abdicate their commitments. They build their lives on God's loving mercy and unending protection. Just watch Daniel's people skills work in this text. Daniel said, let me just try it for 10 days, and then you be the judge. He exercised amazing initiative, courage, and tact, not to mention faith that God would work. And God did miraculously work, because no health food diet is going to make that kind of difference in 10 days. I can tell you by experience that diets take a lot longer and work a lot slower. I ought to have a hallelujah and an amen. See, if it always worked that fast, all of us would be a part of the skinny ministry. See, but God, yeah, y'all slow, amen. But God worked through Daniel, and God worked with Daniel, and the guard was so impressed with what transpired. He took everybody else's filet mignon, took everybody else's Cabernet Sauvignon, and put the entire school on a health food diet. Don't let Babylon tangle you up. Maybe I should pause right there and ask somebody, where has your Babylon, your crisis, your trouble, your trial, your challenge, or your circumstances gotten you tangled up? I don't know if you've heard the story about this young investment banker who went out and bought the car of his dreams. It was a brand new Ferrari. After paying $500,000, he took it out for a spin and stopped at a red light, waiting for the light to change. A frail-looking old man on a yellow moped with a yellow jumpsuit, stretch suit pulled up next to it, looked over at the Ferrari, and the old man said, "What kind of car is that, sonny?" The young man said, "This is a Ferrari, and it cost me $500,000. The old man said, "Wow, that's a lot of money. Why does it cost so much?" And the young man said, "Because it can go up to 320 miles per hour. The old man said, "You mind if I look inside?" "No problem," said the young man. So the old man poked his head in the window and looked at all the bells and whistles lining the dashboard. And sitting back on his moped, the old man whistled and said, "That's a pretty nice car, but I think I'll stick with my moped." And just about that time, the light changed, so the banker, the young man, decided he was going to show the old man just what his car could do. He floored it, and within 30 seconds, the speedometer read 160. But suddenly, the old man looked the young man looked in his rearview mirror and saw a yellow dot that was growing larger and larger and appeared to be getting closer and closer. He slowed down a bit and whoosh, it flew right past him. What in the world could be going faster than my Ferrari? He floored it and got it up to 250 miles an hour. Then ahead of him, he sees it's the old man on his yellow moped. Amazed that the moped could pass his Ferrari, he gave it more gas and took it up to 275, and whoosh, the old man goes past him, and he's feeling pretty good about it until he looks in the mirror again and sees that yellow dot growing larger and larger, gaining on him. Dumbfounded, the young banker floors it, takes that Ferrari to 320, but not 10 seconds later, he sees the moped bearing down on him again. The Ferrari redlines, and there's nothing more he can do. And suddenly that moped plows into the back of his new Ferrari, destroying the rear end. The young man jumped out, and unbelievably, the old man was still alive. The young banker ran to him and said, "Oh my God, is there anything I can do for you?" And the old man whispered with all the strength he could you unhook my suspenders from your side mirror? Intentionally hook our suspenders to something dangerous, dysfunctional, or deadly, but you might be amazed at how many of us get accidentally hooked, leaning in for a closer look. The world around us is littered with the mangled lives of people who never intended to get hooked. They only wanted to take a closer look, and before they knew it, they had become tangled up in something that they could not get away from. I'm preaching to somebody right now who got your suspenders hooked, and before you knew it, you got dragged. You never intended to be a casualty, a collision, or a tragedy. You just leaned in and leaned over a little too long. Learn a lesson from Daniel. When you're in a tough situation, faced with tough decisions, resolve in advance that you're going to honor your convictions, because you'll never survive in Babylon, much less thrive until you do. How do you make tough decisions? Well, number two, you've got to resource yourself by living in community with like-minded people. Let the whole church say resource. When you're faced with tough choices and hard decisions, you need people around you that you can trust. People who have your best long-term interest in mind. Give me an amen right there. People who will tell you not just what you want to hear, but what you really need to hear. And here's the key. You have to locate and sometimes create that caliber of community in advance. Everybody say in advance. Come here for a moment, because Daniel realized that as an immigrant living in a foreign land, he would need all the support that he could muster. So he formed a fraternal fellowship, a small group comprised of 3 people who shared his common experience. Their names are Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. Now, you may not recognize them because I told you Nebuchadnezzar changed their names, and their new names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These 4 studied together, they prayed together, they went to school together, and they faced tough times together. What's my point? Don't try to manage the Babylons of your life on your own. You will never survive, let alone thrive, outside of sincere community with like-minded people. And as people of faith, we need each other. And I've been leading and shepherding people long enough to tell you without fear of successful contradiction that one of the most effective strategies that the enemy employs to cut you loose from your faith and your future is isolation and separation. You need somebody before your journey is over. Tap the neighbor, say, you better treat me right. I love the story of Vice Admiral James Stockdale, who survived 2,714 days as a POW in Vietnam. On one occasion, his captors shackled his legs and his arms and left him outside in glaring sunshine for 3 blistering days with no water, while the guards beat him repeatedly to keep him from going to sleep. After one beating, Stockdale heard a towel snapping in a code that the POWs had devised to send each other messages that he would never forget. It was just 5 letters, GBUJS, standing for God Bless You, Jim Stockdale. Because for those POWs, the briefest experience of community, of being connected, became literally a life or death matter. Their devotion, their creativity, their ingenuity to making community happen, in spite of unbelievable obstacles, defied belief and demonstrated how precious real community really is. We need other like-minded people to survive in tough times and to help us to make tough decisions in life. So can I ask you a question? Do you share community with a group of other believers? If not, you should, because you need the encouragement of others. You need the prayers of others. You need the counsel of others. You need the support of others. You need their strength to lighten your burden and their smile to magnify your joy. Hezekiah was right when he wrote, I need you. You need me. We're all a part of God's body. Stand with me. Agree with me. We're all a part of God's body. It is His will that every need be supplied. You are important to me, and I need you to survive. Somebody here is in Babylon today, but can I encourage you, stop trying to go through it all by yourself. Stop trying to go through sickness and sadness, pains and problems, disappointment and depression, heartache and heartbreak, all by yourself. Locate, or if need be, create a community of like-minded people, for they are a resource provided by God for your rescue. Charles Spurgeon once wrote, communion is strength, solitude is weakness. If you're not an active member of a church, we'd love to have you, to welcome you and to grow with you, because you need us, and as quiet as it's kept, we need you. Would you help somebody with that message? Say, neighbor, you need us, and we need you. And if you're already a member of a church, I want you to remind yourself frequently of why you are and what it is that God is trying to do in your life by connecting you with redemptive community. Because you are never saved just for you. You are never blessed just for you. You are never healed just for you. You are never helped just for you. You are helped so you can help somebody else. But wait, you can't help hurting people without getting hurt. Look, I know you ain't gonna like this section, but I get so tired of hearing people say and watching people post online, ain't no hurt like church hurt. You ought to grow up and tell the truth. You go to work every week and they done hurt your feelings more than once, and you haven't quit. You go to the club and somebody in the club cussed you out, burn a hole in your new skirt, disrespected you when they twerked in front of your man, but you still going back to the club. Y'all ain't got to say that. I know I'm telling the truth. You go to the grocery store and the clerk didn't even treat you right, and you went back next week. Life is full of hurt. It's not a matter of getting hurt. You will get hurt. It's a matter of how you handle the hurt that makes all the difference. Okay, let me come at it like this. I should tell you, I had an argument with my shirt this week. My plan was to do as I'd always done. When I'm scheduled to preach in revival, I get to the city, I check in the hotel. I'm very intentional. When I get there, I get my clothes ready for the service and I iron my shirt. But Friday, this past Friday, I was scheduled to preach. And I'd been in Baltimore earlier in the week, flew on to Columbus, Ohio. I got to Columbus, and Friday in the hotel, in the Hilton Hotel in Columbus, Ohio, me and my shirt had it out. We had an argument and my shirt talked back. Now don't look at me funny, because Shakespeare said there are sermons in stone. So if a stone has a sermon, certainly a shirt has a story. I was getting ready to iron my shirt and the shirt started talking. Shirt started complaining. Shirt started arguing with me. Why are you treating me like this, Lance? I see you warming up that iron. You planning to steam me, aren't you? Why are you going to put that hot iron on me? What did I ever do to you? And I found myself talking to my shirt and I said, Miss Shirt, I'm not upset with you. I'm trying to do something for you, because unbeknownst to you, traveling has put some wrinkles in you. And tonight I've got to wear you, which means you're going to be on display for everybody to see. So I've got to iron you, but I promise I won't put any more heat on you than what it takes to get you straight. Come here, child of God, because when God allows you to be pressed, when God allows you to take the heat, God is not trying to destroy you, because the iron is in God's hands. He's only going to permit enough heat on you to get the wrinkles out of you so that you'll be ready for what He has for you. I'm almost finished, but look, number three, how do you handle tough decisions? You got to release yourself into the hands of God. Daniel believed that because God is sovereign, his life, including his dislocation, his relocation, his suffering, all had meaning and purpose. Would you help me right here? Just look at a neighbor and say, neighbor, everything you're going through has a purpose. See, researchers say that the main reason that people commit suicide, the main reason that people give up in hard times is not the intensity of their suffering, but their belief that their suffering has no meaning. People who study human resilience point out that suicide notes rarely speak about failing health or rejection or finances or even physical pain. Instead, they say things like, there's no reason to go on. There's no reason for me to keep on living. See, Daniel and his compatriots resolved to trust God no matter what. To trust in God's safety, trust in God's security, trust in God's sovereignty, trust that all things were working together for their good and for God's glory, even in Babylon. To trust that there was a point to the pain, a cause for the crisis, a purpose running through it and in it. And they were right, because God was already at work. Let me show it to you and I'm done. Daniel decided, watch this, and God provided. Okay, don't miss that. That decision always comes before provision. Verse 2, God delivered Jehoiakim into Nebuchadnezzar's hands. Verse 9, God caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. Verse 15, God interceded on Daniel's behalf and made the 10-day test succeed. Verse 17, God gave them knowledge and understanding and wisdom of all kinds of literature and learning. God gave Daniel the ability to interpret dreams. Daniel resolved to trust God no matter what. He decided and God delivered. He elected and God protected. He released and God rescued. To survive and to thrive in the Babylons of your life, you have to affirm to yourself over and over. Look at your neighbor, say over and over. You got to affirm over and over that God is sovereign. God is in charge. God is at work. Even if I don't see it, I'm going to trust God's heart when I cannot trace God's hand. Daniel and his 3 friends knew that. And because they did, instead of being conformed, they became transformers. They joined God in his work, and God used them to bring glory to his name. Even in a foreign land, they grew in prominence. They grew in influence. They grew in authority. And the question we've got to ask ourselves today in our Babylons, it's not how can we get out of this, but what is God trying to show me in this? I'll help you and I'm done. Because God often uses the problematic to show us the possible. Well, I'm preaching. Okay, that's Freddie Haynes' statement right there. In fact, Freddie once shared a story with me about a young member of his church who came to greet him on a Sunday, and he was holding a $100 bill in his hand. Little boy and shouting, "Pastor, I got a $100 bill." And Freddie said, "How'd you get that $100 bill?" He said, "Well, I got beat up by some bullies at school during recess." Confused, Freddie said, "I don't understand. What does a $100 bill have to do with getting beat up by the bullies at recess?" The little boy said, "Well, when the bullies jumped me during the recess and they beat me up, I fell down. And when I fell down on the ground, I started looking around. And when I was looking around, I saw something shining in the bushes. The principal and the teachers saw me on the ground, came running out to make the bullies leave me alone. They took us all to the office, but when they picked me up off the ground, I ran over to the bushes to see what it was that was shining in the bushes, and it was a cell phone. I picked it up. I went on in the principal's office. I'm holding this cell phone in my hand, and the guest speaker for our General Assembly that day was the regional manager of AT&T. He saw the cell phone in my hand and said, "Hey, is that my cell phone?" I said, "It must be. I found it outside in the bushes, and I brought it in here to turn it in." The manager said, "You're an honest young man. I'm going to give you a reward." And he pulled $100 out of his pocket and gave it to me because of what I saw when I got knocked down. I'm finished. The next time you get knocked down, don't spend all your time crying. You ought to look around, because God is trying to show you something. God is trying to give